Hello and welcome to this evening's webinar, How Technology Can Aid Creativity. This is our first webinar in a series of ISM Trust and Delic sessions. Over 4 free future-focused sessions for music professionals, panels of industry experts will discuss current issues for musicians and explore how we might find a solution to overcome these challenges, focusing on tools, skills, and strategies to help music creators succeed. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of the ISM Trust, it is the Incorporated Society of Musicians' sister charity and works to ensure that all music professionals in the UK can reach their full potential. We create pioneering resources to support all those who work in music and seek to challenge, educate, and inspire through webinars, seminars, events, printed and digital resources, and advice packs. A few words about Delic as well. They provide a cloud-based digital project organizer, automated rights management, and an artist profile hub to manage songs, share music, and build businesses. Before I hand over to Vic and our panelists for today, I have a few technical points for you. If you experience any technical difficulties, such as sound quality issues, please let us know in the chat box and we'll attempt to resolve the issue. Subtitles are also available if you wish to enable or disable them by selecting the live caption option at the bottom of the screens. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM's Trust website at ismtrust.org/webinars, as well as on our YouTube channel and obviously Delic's website. If you have any questions, please let us know in the questions box and we will endeavour to answer as many of them as possible. You can also join the conversation online and continue it following the webinar by using the hashtag ISMxDelic, which is also on the screens. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to Vic and our panelists, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Maria. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Delic Session number 1 in partnership with the ISM Trust. It's a delight to be back here. Our first session is called How Technology Can Aid Creativity. Now, critics say that technology is compromising our ability to be creative, but if used correctly, it could have the opposite outcome. In this session, our panelists examine how technology can be an intrinsic part of making music, focusing on the types of technology available to them and how it can be used to enhance their creative process. I've got an amazing panel. I know some of them, I don't know all of them, and it's going to be a great discussion. As Maria just said, please, if you've got any questions, if there's anything that we're not covering that you would like us to cover, pop the questions in the chat box and we'll get to them towards the end of the session. We're going to chat for about an hour, so it'll probably be myself and the panelists for 45 minutes or so, perhaps slightly less than that, and then your questions towards the end. So, you know, have a think. If there's something we've covered you want some more detail on or anything, just pop a question in. So my panelists are multidisciplinary composer, performer, and producer Bishi. Hi, Bishi.
Hi Vic.
It's nice to see you again.
Hi, nice to see you again too. Yeah.
You're very glamorous and beautiful as you were the last time. So thank you for making the effort for Zoom.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We also have co-founder and head of sound innovations at Black Goblin, Anna Betancourt. Hello, Anna. Nice to see you too.
Nice to see you. Didn't do the effort, sorry.
Oh, you did so. Look at that bookshelf behind you. I don't want to get too dirty.
Nice for you.
It looks impressive though. And I know you're in Edinburgh with some air conditioning on, and that's a rare thing as well.
Right.
So thanks for joining us. Also on the panel, we have creator of the audio-visual software system, Isadora, Mark Coniglio. Mark, lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And you've joined us from your holiday in France as well.
That is true. I'm in the north of France, and the sun came out today after we also had some rain like we were talking about. So I'm really happy to join the session and be here with you all today.
Well, that is true dedication, and we really appreciate it. Last but certainly not least, a regular on the Delic sessions, Delic CEO, John Maxwell Hobbs. John, lovely to see you.
Great to see you again, Vic, and great to see everybody on this panel. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Tell me, are those all homemade guitars behind you? Because I do know that that's a bit of a hobby of yours.
Yeah, all but one. The little one isn't, but yeah, all of them, pretty much all of them were built during lockdown. So it's helped keep me sane.
Definitely, and probably shamed quite a few people who sat there watching, telly for 18 months. Anyway, brilliant stuff. Let's get into the conversation. Yes, how technology can aid creativity. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer nowadays because everything is aided by technology, but there are skeptics out there. Social media is distracting us. A million different TV channels are distracting us. The internet is distracting us. Are we actually less creative now that we've got all these tools at our disposal? But before we get into the absolute minutiae, can you just tell us a little bit about your journey, what you do, and kind of how you got there? Bishi.
Hi. So I'm lucky in that I came from a very musical family. So I was trained in the piano and voice. My mother's an Indian classical music singer. So I had some Indian, I had Indian classical training as a child. I actually had sort of tech phobia when I was growing up. I'm a part of the first generation to grow up on the internet, with the internet. And it's really because of the internet and social media that I've been able to have a very modern career. And from there, I've really learned to get over my technophobia. I've always been into multifaceted polymath creators. There was a book called Talking Music that I bought when I was 16 from City Lights. And I found out about people like Laurie Anderson and Meredith Monk and Philip Glass. And I've always been fascinated by the intersection of music and art and technology and performance. And it's all kind of grown from there on.
Brilliant. Well, we're going to ask you all about what you do and what kinds of technology you use in your art, because, as you say, multifaceted. It's fascinating to me, apart from everyone else watching. Anna, tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about Black Goblin, if you could.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. Yes, I'm the co-founder of a company called Black Goblin, and we are an audio services and technology company, and we are aimed at providing sustainable and accessible sound production for all. Focus a little bit more on the audiovisual sector. And our company, seeks to establish a collaborative and friendly approach to sound. I have the role of, I co-founded the company with a sound designer fellow, Gabrielle Haley, and I have the role of head of sound innovations, which I guess is just a fancy term to say I come up with like really crazy ideas, then I just go to everyone in the team and say, can we actually make this happen? And then our software developer says no, but then I say, like, can we? And he was like, okay, we'll try. That's really basically what it is. At the minute, we are developing our first product, which is called Subversive. And what Subversive is a collaboration platform which allows visual artists to collaborate with sound professionals, basically in the creation of sound effects for film, for games, and so on. That's really what I'm up to at the minute. My background is in audio engineering, and I have a master's degree in sound design by the University of Edinburgh. So kind of educated and stay here. And yeah, I mean, that's what we're up to, a little bit like Bishi. I kind of, I really have always been fascinated by the combination of technology and arts, and how a lot of the artistic kind of exploration can kind of delve into other industries and other things like environmental studies, to mention a few, business, and so on. And that's really what the root of Black Goblin is in my work in general.
Well, it's fascinating, and I'll ask you about, I think, maybe in a little bit more detail about Black Goblin and Subversive later on as well. Mark, tell us about Isadora and a little bit about your journey and your background as well, please.
Sure. Well, my journey began at 16 years old when I taught myself how to program computers, but I loved music, and in the end, I ended up going to California Institute of the Arts, where I studied with Morton Subotnick, one of the great American contemporary music composers. So I was a composer, and at that time, I co-founded a dance company with a choreographer who also went to Cal Arts called Dawn Stopiello, and it was called Troika Ranch. And our entire purpose, or our interest, was to find ways to use sensors on the dancers' bodies to allow them to make music, to later to change visual imagery. In other words, to kind of turn the dancers, not to have them not just be movers, but actual musicians, or even produce the lighting through their movement. Yeah, we wanted to expand the stage to include the body of the dancer in that way. So I did that for nearly 25 years, which is how I am so happy to see John. We've written each other, but to see him again, because I know John because one of the first really big performances Troika Ranch did in New York was at the Kitchen when he was the executive director. A multi-city remote performance, something that is obviously of interest right now. We can tell that story with absolutely the most brutal backstage tech line that ever happened in the history of performance. He remembers that, I'm sure. Uh, but anyway, the other part of the story is that a certain way I've been doing all this stuff with music, but then I got interested in like, wow, there was some software to do video. Couldn't we expand the capabilities of the dancer to control video? And there simply wasn't any tool that felt good under my fingers. So since I had this background as a programmer, I said, okay, I'm going to write it. And I did. And more people found out about it, and then they were like, I gave some copies away, and then I thought, oh, I'll sell it. Maybe like 50 people will buy it. That'll be amazing. But now it's like thousands. And somehow the hardest part of my journey is still finding time to make music and make art with what I'm doing with this company. But it's also interesting, last thing I'll say, is that Isadora is primarily focused on visuals, but the thinking behind it and the way in which it works, you can still make music with it actually, although it's more so used for visuals. But I think the creative element of how it's made, that's the thing that maybe is why it's useful to have me here today. So that's my story.
Well, it's fascinating. And I think I mean, if all four of you were all from the same kind of background and doing the same kind of thing, it would probably be a one-dimensional conversation. So I think it's great to have different aspects and different perspectives from the visual side of things as well as the audio side. And with Bishi, all of them. John, tell us a bit about your journey and a little bit about Delic and maybe how you remember Mark and that whole scenario as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was Mark came in with Mort Subotnick as we were working with an organization that was based out of Los Angeles called the Electronic Cafe, who were doing what they called telematic performance, connecting people around the world. And they had been doing it since the 1970s, actually. An amazing project they did using satellite technology called Hole in Space, which was basically video conferencing, but for people on the street. And Mark came in, and at that point, he'd been building this bit of software that kind of was the forerunner of Isadora, called Interactor, which drove all of that sort of. I remember there was a piece where Dawn would dance and fluorescent lighting tubes would move as she was moving. And we were doing all of these sorts of things back and forth, which was pretty fascinating. My background is in theater and music. I've always been a self-taught musician, and I love to pull things to pieces. My father was really into DIY, and for anybody who from the States, they probably will know about these Heath kits, and he would build things like a hi-fi amplifier or a shortwave radio receiver or things like that. And he taught me how to solder at a very young age. And then I would just do all sorts of things like there was actually a hi-fi amplifier he had built in the 1950s that he gave to me to use for my first electric guitar. So I just did all these experiments of like overdriving guitars into this, tube amplifier, and basically trying to abuse technology as much as possible. And it was a fascinating time to come of age in the early days of transitioning from analog technology to digital technology. Mm. And I still remember my father showing me in his office one of the first, I'd say, recording typewriters. It was made by IBM, and it was a Selectric with, sort of the printer ball. And it had a little piece of digital media associated with it. So you could type. It wasn't quite a word processor, but it would record what you typed So you could then print out multiple copies from a typewriter and make changes. And I still remember, and this was back in the 70s, my father said, someday you're actually going to be able to put music on one of these recording things. And I just, wow, this is really amazing. So I just started getting involved in that, working on early, Atari computers when you could spend a day and a half on the internet downloading one of the first digitized songs, which was the first, I think, 2 seconds of Van Halen's "You Really Got Me," their cover of the Kinks. And it was like, wow, this is like amazing. This is completely useless, but I'm absolutely fascinated by this. And so it's always been associating, with things like that. And then having the opportunity to work as a producing director at the kitchen and getting to meet, Laurie Siegel and Laurie Anderson, Mort Subotnick, all of the people who basically created this stuff, Woody and Stana Vistolka, and just, discovering that the world was full of all sorts of people who said, hey, let's see what happens if I just jam this cable into this plug and what comes out the other end, which long-winded way leading me to Delic. Delic is a platform to help people experiment and to use technology to actually take care of some of the more boring stuff while people can get on with the creative stuff.
Yeah, and I suppose in a digital 21st century way, stick that plug into that socket and see what happens.
Exactly.
It's the same thought process, but in a new age. Well, we are.
Vic, I'm sorry, Vic. Could I just add one additional note about the electronic cafe? Just a short thing.
Sure.
It's if you don't know who the electronic cafe, Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz, people out there watching, look it up, because they did what we do every day on Zoom in 1980, before the internet was still 15 years away. And the mode in which we communicate and the way that we do this, they were visionaries. They saw it before anyone, and it's well worth taking a look at the stuff they did, even if it's just the recordings of what they did in 1980. They're really special artists, and I was lucky that we also, Dawn and I, did our very first shows in Los Angeles at the Electronic Cafe. So I just want to send a little props out to them, because they're really special people that added something to a dimension that right now during the pandemic is so important.
Yeah, and just out of interest, just while we're on that, how far away were the different people talking on different screens, as it were? Were they in different rooms or in different?
No, it was, they had a storefront. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but as I understand it, a storefront in New York City and a storefront in Santa Monica, and they got a satellite from NASA to be able to send the audio and video across the country. That's how they were able to do it, because there was no way to do that at that time.
Exactly, with one of the first projection TVs, and there was no information. People just happened across it, and it was sort of like, well, where are you? It's like, I'm in LA. Oh, I'm in New York. And by the end of it,
we take this sort of stuff for granted, especially during the pandemic. I mean, it was a saving grace for business and for, friendships and relationships across the globe. And yet these guys were experimenting and doing it, over 40 years ago.
Yeah,
exactly.
And this is when a long distance telephone call would cost you like $4 a minute,
Right. Yeah. Well, fascinating. And now we are sort of music driven with the Delic sessions. So we're going to sort of concentrate mainly on music, although we will divert into visualization as well with Mark. But just in terms of composing, recording at home, which is where, certainly over the last 18 months, everyone's been doing it pretty much. Digital audio workstations. Where's a good place to start? What do you use, and what would you recommend? Bishi, I'll start with you.
Personally, I use Logic and I use Ableton. I do know that for beginners, GarageBand comes on a lot of laptops already, and there's an integration between GarageBand and Logic. So effectively, GarageBand does all of the basic stuff that you can find in Logic anyway. But I think I've met other producers that have taught themselves. There are people who are on Fruity Loops. There are people who find all kinds of other free DAWs that that they begin to make music on. I'm lucky in that I got to train in Logic when I was still in my final years of school. So that's where I'd personally start. But for people who have more of a cut and paste attitude, Fruity Loops or GarageBand is just as good.
Yeah, and GarageBand's free, obviously,
yeah.
if you have an Apple computer. Are there other free options? Do you know of any other free options?
Well, I recently was an invigilator for the Royal College of Art Fashion MA, and that was really fascinating because people are using gaming software, they're hacking into other kinds of software to start to delve into sound and delve into music. So I think there's all kinds of things that you can do now, for sure.
Well, Neil in the chat room has been in touch saying, Ableton 11 is free for 90 days if you want to trial it. So that's interesting to know. Thank you, Neil. I use Cubase actually, and that's purely because I looked over the shoulder of a friend who I was in a band with who used Cubase. And so that's the one I'm used to. You mentioned training, Bishi, but a lot of people will be freaked out by that. Oh, do I need training to use, a DAW? And it's really up to the person. I mean, John, which software platform, which DAW do you use?
I use Cubase, and I've been using it since 1991. So I'm kind of locked into it, and I get very confused when I try to use something else. And it's an interesting sort of thing. When I started out, it was all purely MIDI. So doing lots of stuff, MIDI, loop-based, creating things like that. And I found over the past few years, I've begun just using it like a tape deck. These days, I just do things in long takes. I do very little editing. I've gone back to the days when I was, using a reel-to-reel recorder. And I was so bad at editing, I'd try to avoid editing at all because I'd usually end up bleeding all over the cutting block and having tape stuck to all my fingers.
Yeah, because it was with a razor blade and tape back then. I mean, when I first joined the BBC, they were still doing that as well. It was just at the point when digital editing was coming in. And the thing was the precision that people could do these edits with. I mean, it blows my mind. But yes, I mean, I use Cubase, as I say, and I know all the DAWs. I've had a look at most of them or worked on some of them as well. And they are similar in certain ways, and they do have that ability to combine MIDI, digital sort of recording and analog recording. Basically, stick a mic into a decent interface into your DAW, and off you go. Anna, what do you use with Black Goblin and when you're sound designing?
Yeah, so I'm gonna come here with I don't know if it's gonna be a weird or if you guys are gonna agree a bit, but at the minute, I'm actually, well, that's my door ringing. That's a great timing. At the minute, I'm multi-DAW. So okay. when I just started, my background wasn't more, it was in audio engineering, in recording in studio, a little bit more formal training. So it was Pro Tools for everything, certification in Pro Tools. You're talking about when I started, it was maybe like 10, 12 years ago. So it was a standard thing to do, always Pro Tools and so on. But then I actually went to do my master's in sound design, which is kind of more, the whole idea of the master's degree was more to be kind of the DAW didn't really matter. It was about how you use it. And in a way, I think that you're really right in the sense that, I mean, at least from an audio perspective, every single DAW contains the same information, the same basic kind of layout, and it's trying to emulate something that we had in the past, which is the analog gear for recording and so on. So if you kind of see it that way, it becomes a little bit less scary to learn these things. Mm-hmm. And then basically, at the minute, I just use Pro Tools. I use Reaper as well, which is quite low, inexpensive software. and it allows you to do so many things. I also use Unity, which is something that Bishi was talking about. And it's just about what you're doing. Depends on what type of work we're doing with the company. If we're doing games, if we're doing something that is not linear, maybe we'll go for something like Unreal or Unity. If we're doing work for a film, maybe we'll stick to Pro Tools. If we're doing binaural, we'll do Reaper. It depends on what you're doing. It just becomes, and maybe I'm jumping on the conversation, but it becomes this like, you use what suits the type of work, basically.
Sure. Oh, that's the great thing. And I would imagine with Delic, John, that it's compatible, it's multi-DAW compatible as well. So if you're sharing files and working on a project together with your collaborators, you could access it via Logic or Cubase or Pro Tools or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. The platform is DAW agnostic. So if you want to share something with someone else who's using the same DAW, that's very easy. You just drag and drop and upload and download. It's zipped up and handled in an easy way to manage. And we manage the versioning. It's trickier if you're moving between DAWs, and that's when you're going to want to output things as stems. And we've got workflows that support stems, and actually tutorials on the site that explains how to transfer between different platforms using things like stems and the two interchange formats, OMF and AAF.
Okay.
And ultimately, if somebody makes a perfect translation program between, they're going to make a huge amount of money. But they may die trying first because it's not easy.
File formats from place to place, from visual to audio, from DAW to DAW. Please, someone help.
If I can interject a little bit as well, it would be like an interesting thing to talk about AAF, for example, which is an attempt to do this kind of things, and that is used a lot in film to audio as well. But it's an interesting because you can use it in music too. Yeah, we can talk about that later.
I was just going to add, I think it's really interesting to look at a generational a continuum that we're in here. Like, I'm an old guy, I mean, I've been around this for a long time. I also, like, we're coming, this notion of the moment when things went from analog to digital. I was going to school at the moment that happened. We talked about that. And then, but some of you here are younger and in a different place where, like, cutting and splicing actual tape is maybe not part of your life experience. And I think it's like, I still use digital, digital performer. That's my tool because that's what I started with a million years ago. And it's the thing that feels the most comfortable under my fingers, right? If you gave me Ableton, I'm not sure I'd really know what to do with it, because it's not just that it's a different piece of software. The concept of how one makes music with Ableton is fundamentally different than the concept with which you do something like, digital performer is a very traditional, old-fashioned, I'm a composer, I write music like this, as opposed to I've got beats and things and I can bring those in improvisationally during the set, right? And I think that these differences are really interesting. I think, I love talking to people that are 20 years old who have no idea of this history, to hear what they're interested in and what software they're using that I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So, the actual mode with which we compose is generationally based, and it changes over time. And we see that span already here in the panel that we have today. And that's something that for me is really interesting, is how does technology drive us forward into actual new forms of composing?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what Mark's saying, because I'm placed in between different generations. And if I talk to people who are slightly younger than me about things like splicing tape, they just think everything's cool. As if you just tell them what the idea is, and I think what's interesting about the internet is that there can be a real loss of context. And so if you have a context, and if you understand like timelines and history, and you present that back to people who maybe don't know those histories, they just think everything is cool, because it is. I mean, it sounds like a very superficial thing to say, but it's actually not. I feel like people's mentality and their ideas they're a lot thirstier and a lot more hungry for things, which I think is really exciting.
You think they're hungry and thirstier for things now than they were 20 years ago or whatever?
I think so. Even when I look at things like general music programming, or look at gigs, or just look at the lay of the land, you know, things that are very, very experimental command big audiences in a way that I don't remember when I was a teenager. I started going to experience really experimental avant-garde things, and there was kind of quite a limited audience because there were limited avenues of communication, and now it's grown. And I feel like a lot of younger musicians don't really obsess about the mainstream, or they don't even care about, for bands and musicians, it used to be the thing of like, one day I will headline Glastonbury. Now everyone loves Glastonbury and they love the idea of maybe headlining it, but they know that there are all of these other worlds that you can conquer, and there are all of these other stages and other modes of expression that I think technology has allowed. So I think there's a lot more openness around how you create. Yeah.
It's fascinating, and I think you're absolutely right. The more people I speak to, I mean, I'm going to be quite personal here, but I spoke to my girlfriend who's, 35 years old, and I said, "Oh, Annie Mac is leaving Radio 1," and she went, "Who's Annie Mac?" And I was like, "You're the perfect age to have sort of grown up with her," and she's just not interested in Radio 1, in mainstream culture. She loves, pop culture. But she's an alternative thinker, an alternative music lover, and uses technology in alternative ways and so on, and just has no real interest in the mainstream. And that was someone connected to me, that there are people, 20 years younger than her who will have no interest in that whatsoever. And as I say, I suppose you can find your silos, or your little echo chambers, if you wanted to be negative about it, but you can also find your tribe. You can find your community who are interested in different things. Moving the conversation on a little bit, in terms of finding technology that you're using to create art, is there anything that you've discovered recently that's really blown your mind? Bishi, start again if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working with a really interesting mixed reality company called Volta. We first did a live stream performance for the Amazon Music Sessions, which was streamed via Twitch, completely in VR. They'd never done anything like that. I'd never done anything like that. We had about 5 days to put this together, the most intense stress, but it was so amazing what we pulled off. They're developing a desktop app so that musicians can live stream in VR from home. So I've been helping in the development of that. I've been creating some of my own video performances and understanding how to map everything back into my Ableton production. So I think the desktop app is made in Unity. So I've been having fireworks going off in my head as I've been linking all of the different aspects to my music, to all the visual aspects. And, it really is like psychedelics to the next level. So I've been experimenting with that. I also recently recorded for an AI sound therapy platform called WavePaths, which is exploring the relationship between psychedelics and mental health and depression, and really learning about all kinds of things. I'm also about to embark on a collaborative project with fantastic non-binary artists called Anil Sebastian and another woman called Portrait XO, and they are AI specialists. So they're talking about sound in terms of food and data sets, and I just sit there really with my mouth open. It's completely next level, but I love them and I'm just enjoying the entire journey.
And do you have your own sort of collective as well? Your own sort of, is it called WITCiH?
It's called WITCiH. So WITCiH.
Sorry.
It
was Bishi and WITCiH. You see,
yeah. No, lots of people think that, and that makes me really happy. But it is WITCiH, which is the Women in Technology Creative Industries Hub, and it's a platform to commission and support women and non-binary creators who are polymaths who have technology at the center of what they do. I recently curated a online digital festival, which was headlined by Laurie Anderson, and we commissioned 5 new works. And I just really enjoy it. I find it so satisfying to bring people together.
And just out of interest, just to link you with one of our other panelists, have you ever used Isadora at all, or does that come into your sort of universe?
Not yet, but I'd love to. I'm really fascinated. I'm going to give that a good Google after this session.
Cool, good. Anna, moving on to you. Any new technology that's come into your kind of stratosphere and that you're using or have been over the pandemic, for example?
Yeah. I mean, we have been working on developing our new kind of our new technology with Subversive. So originally our software started kind of using procedural audio and physical modeling to create sound effects just using a computer. So that was kind of the focus of what we were doing. So a lot of what we were using as a base was, you know, kind of very code-based C++ or Max for prototyping and so on. Now it has changed a little bit because we're adding new aspects of artificial intelligence, and we're collaborating with Robert Gordon University and their artificial intelligence department. So we're actually bringing not so much new tools themselves, but just a different way of using them, of using coding programs. But also one thing I was mentioning is recently we've been working with virtual reality, with implementation of sound and virtual reality. But what that has done for us is, because we still work very much with filmmakers, we started bringing a little bit of the concepts of binaural, of this mix, which is 360 but for headphones. It started bringing those concepts into linear form, so into filmmaking. So using things like Unity or kind of 360 plugins like the Waves plugins, for example, or the ATK toolkit, for example, to mix binaural audio in film and see what it can do to narrative. So a little bit more of experimentation in that area.
Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating as well. I have a friend who works for Rockstar Games, who are, you know, a huge company and based in Edinburgh, or certainly, you know, started. And he's a sound designer and composer for them. But every time I see him or speak to him, he mentioned something that both of you have just mentioned: virtual reality. It's VR. It's everything seems to be VR driven at the moment. Mark, tell us, are you involved in any way? Is Isadora compatible with VR and any technology that's blown your mind recently?
It's not really a VR tool. It's extremely good with video, but integrating with that kind of thing is not really its purpose. Although you could use it to like produce feeds into that or whatever. It's not the central purpose of it, however. And to answer your question in terms of software, I don't know. I was too busy trying to save my company over the pandemic, because when this all started, I was like, every single person who uses my software is now out of work. And so my focus had to switch to, this is why I haven't had much time to discover new things, is what do we need to do to allow artists to make work now, in the situation we're in now, where we cannot go into a theater and whatever. And John, it's so interesting, and we should sometime have a private conversation about it, but everything that happened in 1996 when we did this multi-city thing where we were connecting using something called ISDN lines, about how do we bring performers together and have them effectively work with each other, that became the focus of what we started. We changed our whole path of what we were developing to create tools to allow artists to do that. And I'm really proud to say, I mean, I love making art. I also love enabling artists. And what I saw were my users making pieces that had, like, okay, one piece that I can brag about a little bit. There's a director called Jared Mazacci, who created a piece with another director whose name I'm sorry I don't remember, called Russian Troll Farm. There were 4 actors in 3 cities. He, as the director, was in another city, and they were using my software to bring all of those people together, matted together. He, as the director, is punching all the cues for all the actors, because it was absolutely live. It was not a recording, and that was going out streaming. And so why is it important that it was live? because the actors know it was live. And this goes back to a lot of the things with Troika Ranch. When we're together, we also know we're live. We know that, like, you know, you can't really, you don't want to really like cough real loud or anything, or, you know, have an embarrassing thing happen behind you in the frame. This is live for us right now. That changes the energy with which we interact. And that's what my users were using my software for. So, I mean, I don't mean to, I don't want, I'm not really here to give a sales pitch, but it's like I really had to focus on what can we do not only so that our users can continue to make art, but so that we'll make it. You know what I mean? Because I'm very proud to say that we made it through the pandemic without firing anybody. We're still here. You know, we're a small company, but we made it. And so for me to see them do that, because this piece that Jared created was named one of the best theater pieces of 2020 by the New York Times, and to have a piece that appeared only on video in that way, acknowledged by a serious newspaper like that, to me was a really, really great moment. And because the thing you also mentioned this, the genie, or the whatever, the genie is out of the bottle. We are not people who are doing performances in real spaces and having 40 people show up because it was very experimental, very contemporary. That changed. Suddenly they could have 200 people were showing up because it was the whole world. This is, I don't know if it was Anna or Bishi who mentioned this, but like, that's not going to stop even when the pandemic someday comes to a complete end, right? And that's what I'm curious about too, because there's a lot of problems, especially with music. John, you remember all the stuff going on with this piece that we attempted to do, with these several pieces in 1996. The problems are the same about synchronization. Who's going to be in charge? How do you bring musicians together when there's inherent delays in the system? So some of those things, these questions about how do we continue in a post-pandemic world to bring geographically separate artists together, I've become really passionate about that over the pandemic. That's become a new topic.
Yeah,
for me that
and
I'm
it's an
super
absolute
interested in.
necessity now, as we've all discovered. I mean, even going to the practice room, the rehearsal room, and jamming together became an impossibility for months and months. John, just while we're talking about, you know, the same topic in terms of technology and things that you've discovered, do you use creator tools at all? Is there anything that you use or that you've learned to use over the last 18 months that you didn't before?
I'm just trying
Apart from
to
the
think.
soldering iron.
Yeah, I mean, there's a soldering iron, which actually there's another David Tudor, early electronic musician, worked a lot with John Cage and things like that. Soldering was actually part of his performance. He would be building circuits on stage to make, you know, new sounds that nobody would expect. Things that I've been experimenting with are focused on quality of sound, sort of dealing with plugins that model acoustic spaces, or model analog equipment, you know, amplifier types, and also just trying to figure out, once again, how digitally can I plug something into something else that wasn't expected to be plugged into, building stuff out of feedback loops and things like that, which are in the analog world very easy to do, and in the digital world not as simple. So once again, trying to figure out how to break
the technology to make it work in different ways. Well, that's the way to make ideas come out, really. I know we're getting loads of really good questions coming in from viewers, so we'll cut to them in just a second. But just, I want to talk about all these different platforms that are available. As mentioning creator tools, one that comes to mind is Splice. There's Loop Cloud, Sound Snap, Big Fish Audio, Noise, TrackLib. Bishi, do you use any of these, or do you know people who use them?
I do know people who use them. I know people who've created for Splice. I actually created an electronic sitar sound pack for Landa. I think they're working in a slightly similar way. I mean, yeah, I think it's really exciting. I'm just looking at the chat, and I think some people have brought up the price of things, which I think is really fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I do think that they're really exciting tools, but I do also understand that everything comes at a price. So I'm kind of on the fence about it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I tell you what, let's go through some of these questions. There's some great questions and topics to consider here. Why is technology such a loaded word nowadays? Amplifiers and record players are technology. Pink Floyd's stage shows have been run by computers since the 80s, right? Discuss. Oh, well, I think we kind of know that.
Well, actually, but it is an interesting question because the actual answer in my book is marketing. Because technology with a capital T is a way to sell something. That it's actually saying it's the latest, coolest technology. So the person is actually right, you know, because stage lighting in the theater was also technology. It was new media in 1900 or so. So I think that that's the real answer to the question, though, is that it's used to make something sound more cool or more valuable, and it is actually totally meaningless.
Yeah.
I'll jump in with a couple quotes because I like them. One is Brian Eno. It said technology is the word we use for stuff that doesn't work yet. And then there's the great thing from Douglas Adams. I've pulled it up over here. 3 rules about technology over time. And it's anything that's in the world when you're born is normal and ordinary and is just a natural part of the way the world works. Anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it. And 3, anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things.
Yeah. I'm going to read a message that's been put in the chat box here. It says, as a 23-year-old that started using their first DAW at age 13, I only ever really recorded and created digital music, and I think it's super accessible. And I feel like my generation is now kind of rediscovering analog gear for themselves. Unfortunately, it's just so expensive, but I'd love to record with tape at some point, just because I think it would completely redirect my creative process. I think that's quite interesting as well. Having the ability to do 1 million takes on a digital system, it definitely changes your kind of creative process, doesn't it? If you know, much like using film versus digital camera wise, if you know you've really only got 1 or 2 or 3 possible takes, and then you've kind of got to move on, then things really do change, don't they?
Absolutely. I think so. Yeah. And this is really interesting because a few years back, I was working at the University of Edinburgh in their technical department, and we had a bunch of tape that no one was using. So I actually experimented with this idea. We do a lot of field recording, and it's just such a different idea of going with this idea of I'm going to record everything that I'm hearing versus I'm going to curate what I'm hearing and choose what to preserve. But a little bit going back, if I can, on your accessibility side of things, you know, there's a lot of debates about this curation process and how it sort of goes into your creative process as well. But the accessibility aspect, like for me personally, I'm going to talk about it personally, is quite important because it also delves into the realms of inclusion and diversity, which for me, I mean, as a person who like grew up in Mexico, in a small town in Mexico, trying to, you know, work in sound design, which was a very niche thing that to date, my mom doesn't know what I do, you know. It was a very interesting thing it was a very important thing for me. And I was pretty lucky to be born during a time where I could actually have something in my computer that could aid me, could help me learn these things. And I can only imagine how that would have been if I was, you know, born maybe 10 years before, and that was not a possibility. So I think that's one of the good things about technology, to say about technology helping creativity, the creative process, but also including people that otherwise wouldn't be able to take part in this kind of careers.
Yeah, from a personal point of view, if when we were teenagers making music for the first time or just getting our first bands together and so on, if we could have had a multi-track recording studio within a laptop at our disposal, things would have been different. You know, we had a 4-track when we could afford one, and even then it took us ages to work out how to use it, and then the results weren't that great. If we'd had something simple and easy to use on an iPad or a laptop, it would have been a game changer for us, definitely. Okay, here's another question. Does the panel think that AI and machine learning is assisting creativity or actually undermining it? I think we did a Delic session in the past when we discussed this a lot, and I don't want to be too negative about it, but it's nice to see both sides of it. Bishi, I think you're probably equipped to answer that one.
Yeah, well, I've been spending more and more time around people who are, I guess, a little in that transhumanism area. So they see AI as just like a new language. And actually, the first panel that I hosted for WITCH Digital was exploring AI and gender, and to hear people who are so passionate about it, who see the value of folk musicians playing acoustic instruments and singing, you know, traditional songs from the 16th century, that is as valuable to, you know, training robots and retraining robots. And, you know, to hear that realm of passion, I totally see it from their side. I think it's just adding to the language, but I can see why people don't like it, because it's all a bit scary. It feels all a bit apocalyptic, you know. I'm in a place where I'm just learning about all of it, you know, and I think I'm similar to you, Vic. I see both sides. I can see the scary side of it, but I see the aspirational side of it more.
Are you starting to bring it into your compositions? Are you using AI sort of instruments, as it were? You know, press a key and it composes a line for you, or you know.
Yeah, so not yet. I am getting into a project around that robot Ada, and I'm involved in some kind of compositions where we'll be retraining her, but I'm just at the beginning of that particular project, and it's so crazy. Anyway.
Mark, I think you wanted to say something on this.
Sorry, I got excited. Yeah, I think, you know, this question is a great question, but it's also a question that gets asked at every era. We can just put a blank where AI is. Does the panel think that digital sampling is assisting or creativity, or actually undermining it? Does the panel think that photography is undermining painting? Like, you know, this is a question that gets asked again and again, and the answer is yes to both of the points, right? So as an example of an AI project that I thought was really cool, like someone took a system that was designed to learn to recognize speech, yeah? And instead of training it with a real human voice, he put it in a bus terminal. It just heard the sounds of the bus terminal, but the text he fed it about the kind of text that was written by this person that it was learning, he fed the entire works of William Shakespeare. So then, if you put it back in a bus terminal, this incredibly bizarre version of Shakespeare just starts spewing out of the computer. It was amazing, and it was absolutely because it twisted. Because our expectation of artificial intelligence is that it's going to be clever and almost smarter than us. But here it completely twisted what Shakespeare was, and I saw Shakespeare in a new way, right? On the other hand, artificial intelligence, that kind of technology, allows us now to make images and replicants of a person's face and voice so realistic that we can now start using that as a tactic for undermining democracy, for example. That actually became possible because of artificial intelligence, and that is not only just undermining creativity, it's undermining the fabric of something that at least I really think is important. So the answer is that it's always both ways, but the thing John said it from the very beginning of the meeting, misuse technology, and I'll give one final example from the artist Stana Vasilka, who we also mentioned, who had the pleasure to know. Years ago, she came into me, she said, listen to this, and she played her violin, and this crazy noise came out, and I was like, whoa, that's wild, what is that? Well, there was a unit, a rack unit that came out at that time that was designed to be able to automatically produce harmony if you sang. So you could press the Beach Boys button, and you would sing, and it would produce sound like the Beach Boys were singing with you. But she would feed in noise and all this crazy stuff into it, and the algorithm would go nuts and make music and sounds that you'd never heard before. That's what furthers creativity, is when you take stuff and you try to break it. That's when things get really interesting in my book.
I can see why you and John are good friends, because that sounds exactly what he's doing. I know, Bishi, you have to head off, and so I just want to ask you one more question from the chat box, or get your opinion, and then I know you're going to have to disappear.
Yes.
would you say that psychedelic music and VR games are related? I just wondered if you...
Absolutely, but it depends on who wants to admit things.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a good point to make, and maybe the last point you should make before
Yeah.
heading off into the evening.
Listen, thank you everyone so much. This has been so fascinating, and there's been some great questions. Thank you. You can find me on Instagram, Bishi Official. DM me if you want to ask any questions. And yeah, thank you. This has been really, really fascinating.
Brilliant. Thanks for
so
coming,
much,
Bishi. We'll keep chatting for another 5-10 minutes, and then we will get going as well. So yeah, in terms of psychedelic music and VR games, anyone else got an opinion on that? I mean, there's something in it, I think.
I think
No is the answer.
thinking.
Right. Okay.
You know,
I think
well,
Bishi said it all.
It's the whole concept of, you know, synesthesia.
Okay, Mark.
You know,
Mark, you
where
might. Yeah. I think that's
it. Seeing sounds, or you know, hearing images or things like that, and there could be, you know, significant experiments in that. There's also, you know, I've heard about use of VR for and acoustically as well, to give somebody the experience of someone who might have perceptual differences of yours. So it's about generating empathy, you know, sort of walking a mile in someone's shoes, as it were.
Well, we've got a couple of sort of slightly more visual orientated questions here. Jane is asking in the chat room, is it appropriate to ask which webcam is good to buy if I want to film myself playing piano? She spent £90 on one during lockdown, and she's disappointed with the sound. Mark, do you sort of know about sort of webcams and cameras?
I should have an answer for that question, but I actually don't have a specific answer for that question. I mean, like, even the quality, I've been noticing, I'm having Zoom envy. I get on with people and their images look way better than mine, and I'm like, oh man, mine should look better. I should get a better camera. I actually don't have a specific answer, I'm sorry to say, but if that person wanted to join the Troikatronics, that's the name of my company, Troikatronics, join our forum. Our users are so friendly, you will absolutely get an answer to your question there. Just post that question in our forum.
It's funny how a forum can actually completely change your life sometimes. You just put a random question into something, and then, you know, 20 people get back to you. Anyone else have any idea about webcams?
Just quickly, because I think the question that Jane asked is specifically on sound, on the disappointment of sound. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, like, we don't want to talk about things that are super high budget because we're on limited budgets and so on. But I mean, from my personal experience doing a lot of recording, I would say you want to capture the sound of your piano as good as possible. So potentially a web camera won't be giving you that easily for a very low budget. So you might find that you might be better off getting a kind of inexpensive recorder that is just focusing on the sound so you can get that quality. So I don't want to take too much time of what we're doing, but actually I'm happy to stay behind and have a short chat with Jane if you want to, you know, want to talk about a couple of models or so on. Not for the placement, but I'm always happy to help.
Vaunce has said in the chat room, for experimental musicians operating on a grassroots level and interested in incorporating visuals, how much of a barrier is the technology? For example, in opposition to the democratization of DAWs and bedroom studios, has personal technology and grassroots infrastructure developed enough for the bedroom visual producer? If not, what needs to happen? Did you follow that? I was wondering if maybe you've got something to say on that, Mark.
It has always been my goal to make my software as easy and accessible to as many people as possible. I take great joy in the fact that people can pick up Isadora and start to do something meaningful with it in a day usually, and we have a lot of tutorials that help people out. But really, what's really special about my particular software, I can, you know, there's others that I can speak to too, but what I feel like what's special are the users. That's what I just mentioned. It's like they're so generous and they're so open-hearted, and people, it's like, you just get on our forum and you ask questions, and sometimes it's our team, but a lot of the time it's just the people answering the questions.
A brilliant way to end our discussion, I think. It is a Delic session in partnership with the ISM Trust. Thank you so much for joining us. Mark, you can get back to your holiday in France, and I believe a lovely grill is about to happen as well, so go and enjoy your dinner.
Thank you.
Anna, I will see you in Edinburgh soon, I hope. John, enjoy making another guitar, and good luck with Delic. And Maria, I'll hand back to you, but I do know that we have a Delic session with the ISM Trust in 2 weeks, 24th of August. We're going to have a new set of panelists, a new discussion talking about using merchandise to diversify your revenue. So that'll be a fascinating conversation as well. I'm looking forward to people talking about, making, underpants and mugs and all sorts of, what do you call those digital NFTs those worlds that people make, and that's what I'm fascinated by. I want an expert in that to tell me all about it. Anyway, Maria, I will hand back to you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. Thank you for an engaging discussion. Thank you all for tuning in this afternoon and for your questions. Just to mention again, the recording will be available on the ISM's Trust website at ismtrust.org/webinars, hopefully from tomorrow, as well as on the Delic website. Another note, our website also has a range of webinars available to view on demand, along with other resources to support the sector, many of which are available for free. If you'd like to find out more about our work or are interested in ISM membership, you can find more details on ism.org on our website. ISM membership is open to all UK music professionals and offers legal advice and representation, comprehensive insurance and specialist services. As we mentioned, our next webinar in the series, Using Merchandise to Diversify Your Revenue, will be available on the 24th of August at 6 p.m. You can find out more about it and the rest of the sessions, as well as booking options, following the links in the chat. And lastly, it just leaves me to say thank you again to our panelists, and thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you at another webinar soon. I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.